Imagine being told to press a button that delivers a painful electric shock to a stranger, and doing it over and over again, just because someone in a lab coat said so. Would you do it? Hundreds of people did. Not in a movie, not in a war zone, but in a quiet Yale University lab in the 1960s. These weren't monsters. They weren't criminals. They were normal folks, teachers, salesmen, engineers. And yet they pushed that button again and again and again. The screams were fake, the shocks weren't real. But the reactions? The decisions, the willingness to obey, 100% real. This experiment changed psychology forever and exposed something terrifying about all of us. So what made them do it? What would have made you stop? And how far would you go if someone told you to keep going? This is the story of the Milgram Experiment, and it's disturbing for a reason. It started with a newspaper ad.
Men wanted for a memory study. $4 for 1 hour of your time.
Nothing strange, just another psychology experiment. Volunteers walked into a pristine Yale lab, were greeted by a man in a white lab coat, and were told they'd help test how punishment affects learning. 2 participants, 1 teacher, 1 learner. The teacher would quiz the learner on word pairs. If the learner got it wrong, the teacher would deliver an electric shock. Or so they thought. The twist? The learner was an actor. The shocks weren't real. But the teachers had no idea. They sat in front of a massive shock generator, a panel with 30 switches, each labeled with increasing voltage, from 15 volts to a chilling 450 volts.
As the shocks increased, the learner began to scream, then beg, then go silent.
The teacher would look up, uncertain, disturbed.
Should I stop?
But the man in the white coat calmly replied,
Please continue. The experiment requires that you continue.
Just those words, no threats, no yelling, no punishment. And incredibly, most of the teachers kept going. What were they thinking? Were they heartless or just afraid to disobey? How far would you go if someone authoritative told you to hurt another person? The shocking truth is this. Most people go much farther than you'd ever believe. At 75 volts, the learner. At 120, he. At 150, he yelled,
I want to stop. I told you I have heart trouble.
By 180 volts, he was. And still, most teachers kept going. They shifted in their seats, wiped sweat from their foreheads. Their hands trembled as they read the questions. Some. Others bit their lips. 210 volts. 240, 270. The man behind the wall kept begging. And yet, the teachers flipped the switch again. At 300 volts, he pounded on the wall and... Then, silence. That silence was worse than the screaming. The teacher would look up. Should I stop? The white coat responded. The absence of a response should be treated as a wrong answer. Please continue. And they did. 330 volts, 360, 390. By the time they reached 450 volts, labeled XXX, their voices were shaking. Some covered their faces. Some groaned. One man said, I don't want to be responsible for this. But he still pressed the switch. And then it was over. The learner was fine. It had all been an act. But the teacher? Many sat in stunned silence. Some collapsed. Others cried. One man, I thought I killed him. 65% of participants went all the way to 450 volts. Nearly 7 out of 10 people. And these weren't monsters. They were just people. People who felt trapped, pressured, conflicted. They weren't forced. They weren't bribed. All it took was a voice telling them, you must continue. Think about that. How easily could you be manipulated if the person giving orders wore a badge, a suit, a uniform? If they said it was for science, for safety, or for the greater good? Would you question them? Or just do what you were told? Not everyone obeyed blindly. Some teachers did hesitate. Some paused before flipping the switch, their hands frozen mid-air. A few outright refused. "This isn't right. He said he has a heart condition. I think he's dead." But even then, the authority figure didn't shout, didn't threaten. He just calmly repeated the same phrase. "The experiment requires that you continue." And that was enough. Some participants showed visible distress. One man tugged at his collar and muttered, "This is going to kill me before it kills him." Another clenched his fists and began shaking. One teacher stood up, visibly disturbed, and said, "I'm not doing this," then walked out of the lab. But here's the truly disturbing part. People like him were rare. Most of the teachers stayed. They protested, they questioned, but they complied. Why? Because once the responsibility was passed to the man in the white coat, they felt like they weren't to blame. They weren't making moral decisions. They were following instructions. Psychologists later coined the term moral outsourcing. When someone else appears to be in charge, our internal compass gets overridden. One participant said afterward, "I didn't want to hurt him, but I thought it wasn't up to me." But that's exactly the problem. When we let someone else define what's right or wrong, when we trust authority over our own conscience, that's when things spiral. That same excuse, just following orders, echoes through history, from military atrocities to corporate disasters. We imagine ourselves as the ones who would stand up, who would say no, but under pressure in the moment, would we? Where do you draw the line? And how do you know if you've already crossed it?
Why did they do it?
That's the question that haunted the world after the Milgram Experiment results were published. People didn't just ask what happened. They asked how ordinary people could do something so disturbing. Psychologists offered a chilling explanation. Most people obey authority because we're trained to. From childhood, we're taught to listen to teachers, parents, police, bosses. Society runs on order, and obedience makes it function. But obedience unchecked becomes dangerous. In the experiment, the lab coat wasn't just a jacket, it was a symbol of intelligence, power, safety. The teacher wanted to trust him, wanted to believe it was okay. And when someone else took responsibility, the teacher felt less guilty, even as the learner screamed in pain. It's called the agentic state, when a person stops seeing themselves as the one making choices and starts acting as an agent of someone else's will. I was just the tool, many of them said. But a tool still causes harm. Another factor? Gradual escalation. The shocks didn't start at 450 volts, they started at 15. Just a tiny jolt, just a little more, and more, until they were trapped. That's how manipulation works, slowly, step by step. Here's the terrifying part. When people are under pressure, under stress, or unsure, they're even more likely to obey. When someone in power says it's for your safety, or this is the right thing, our brains want to believe them. Most of the participants weren't blindly cruel, they were scared, conflicted, but still, they pressed the button. And if they did it under those conditions, what would you do if someone gave you an order that felt wrong? What if your job depended on it, your reputation, your freedom? Obedience is easy, resistance is rare. And the scariest truth of all, you won't know what kind of person you are until someone tells you to do the unthinkable and expects you to obey. It would be easy to think the Milgram experiment was just a weird artifact of the 1960s. But the truth is, it never ended. That same blind obedience, that same moral outsourcing, it's still happening every day. Every time someone follows orders without asking why. Every time a worker enforces a policy they know is wrong. Every time someone clicks accept without reading the fine print. Because that's just how it's done. It's in the workplace. It's in law enforcement. It's in government. It's in families. It's not always electric shocks or screaming victims. Sometimes it's subtle, quiet. A rule enforced without compassion. A lie repeated because the boss said to. A policy applied even when it hurts someone. When people say, "I was just doing my job," the echoes of Milgram are there. The scariest part isn't what people did in that lab, it's what that lab revealed about what people can do. The line between good and evil doesn't run between nations or parties or uniforms. It runs through each of us. And unless we actively question, unless we pause and ask, is this right? We risk becoming instruments of harm without even realizing it. The Milgram experiment wasn't just about obedience. It was a mirror, a brutal one. One that shows us how thin the line is between morality and submission, and how easily good people can end up on the wrong side of it, simply by doing what they're told.
The most chilling thing about the Milgram experiment
is that the people who pressed the button didn't look evil.
They look like you. They look like me. And maybe the scariest truth of all is that under the right conditions, with the right voice in our ear, most of us would press that button too. So if this story made you think, really think, give this video a like and subscribe for more true stories that reveal the hidden sides of human nature. Because sometimes the most terrifying experiments are the ones that show us who we really are.